Hey, I'm Daniel and welcome back to another Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era video, and today we're doing a skill line breakdown. I'll explain how it works, highlight some common rules mistakes and share some tips based on official clarifications, community knowledge and my own playtime. Let's go! Alright, so let's talk all about Shadow today. This skill line is from the Thief Constellation, as you can tell by this little icon at the bottom of the reference sheet, which is important for town trainers and other similar effects. It is also associated with stamina as the main stat, and it does not require any battle forms, which means you can roll it in any battle form. And this part is important because sometimes I think people a little bit overlook or maybe misunderstand that during your engage you can roll any number of dice up to your main stats. So for example, with 2 stamina, let's say you can roll 2 of these snipe dice from the bow skill line, and that would be basically your entire stamina limit of rolling only 2 dice. That means you cannot add another one from the shadow skill line because they also require stamina. However, let's say if you roll 2 destruction stuff, 2 force shock dice from the destruction stuff skill line, because they require magicka, it means your stamina is still available for including any other dice to the same engage as long as they fit in the battle form. So obviously you would roll these dice in a magic battle form, and you can also add some shadow dice to the same engage. You can almost visually count like each of those dice for each of your stats. So we have 1 and 2 magicka, and we have 2 stamina that we can still use and utilize for this engage. This is obviously not unique to Shadow. The same is true for most skill dice from the Thief Constellation because they don't require battle form. But I just wanted to point out that because I think sometimes people think that Shadow is only for sort of physical builds, but as a matter of fact you can fit this in any build, and probably in fact it actually works even better on spellcaster builds, at least from this pure action economy perspective. So I hope this is useful. Now let's see what those dice actually do. Starting with level 1, we have Shadow Cloack. On the 1 face it says gain a stealth status die when you place this die in an active slot. Then when engaging an enemy, you may exhaust this die to ignore X defense on your target. And on the other face, it simply gain 1 light fatigue and then gain a stealth status die. So as you can see, we have 3 different results. We have either a complete miss, which is of course a tenacity result, or we have a face with numbers, either number 1 or number 2, and that is the first, the X ignoring X defense on your target, or if you have this symbol without any numbers, that means it is the second phase, which is just gain 1 life fatigue and gain stealth status die. So let's break it down. Let's say we rolled this result with number 1, and it says gain a stealth status die when placing this die in an active slot. So normally you would gain a stealth status die, you place it in your cooldown track, and then you place this die to the active slot like that. And then you can keep this die in your active slot throughout the whole battle. You can exhaust it at any time, and then when you engage an enemy, you may exhaust it to ignore that much defense. It's either 1 or 2 on the other face on this one. Now, very importantly, and I think this is probably the most tricky part of this die, is that to remember that whenever you roll any dice, you can choose a different order in which you resolve the dice. For example, let's say you roll those 2 force shock dice alongside this shadow, you've got the following faces, and you declare this orc bandit as your target, which has 1 defense. Now, if you want to, you can resolve them in this exact order, which means you would place a stealth status die in your cooldown track first, then you place Shadow Cloak in your active slot, and then you can immediately trigger its second part, which says when engaging an enemy, you may exhaust this die to ignore X defense on your target. So if you want to, you can immediately exhaust it to ignore this defense, and only then you would deal damage, of course, and in this case 4 damage. That would actually be enough to defeat this enemy, but because you dealt the damage, you would lose your stealth status die immediately, so it would basically be like that in your cooldown track without stealth. However, let's roll back for a moment. You rolled all the same 3 dice, but maybe you do want to have stealth in your cooldown track after this engage. Well, in that case, you would simply resolve 4 shock dice first, dealing some damage, placing them in your cooldown track, and only after that you would gain a stealth status die and you place this Shadow Cloak in your active slot. In that case, you would not ignore defense on your target for this particular engage, but at least you would end your engagement with a stealth status die. This is of course completely up to you. This is an option, so you can choose whether you want to ignore defense as part of the same engage that you roll this die, or do you want to end your engage with a stealth status die. So as you can see, there is a decent amount of flexibility with this die, purely because of different timing of resolving it, whether you resolve it before dealing some damage or after that. This significantly changes the outcome of your engage. And on the other face of this die, without any numbers, which is this one, it simply says gain 1 light fatigue, then gain stealth status die, and then you simply exhaust this because of this eye symbol. It does not go to your active slot. And you simply place all of those 3 dice in that exact order. So you first gain 1 light fatigue, then stealth, and then this shadow cloak exhausted itself. So it would be in this exact order: light fatigue, stealth, shadow cloak. Moving on to the second die of level 1, we have refreshing shadows. On the one face, gain 1 bonus HP for each unit affected by a stealth status die, and on the other face, remove up to 2 light fatigue from your cooldown track for each unit affected by a stealth status die. So first of all, each unit affected by a stealth status die, this includes not only yourself, but also other party members and even enemies, because some of them have keyword retreat. Sometimes enemies do get stealth as well, and these refreshing shadows does benefit from this as well. So on the one face, you would gain 1 bonus HP for each unit affected by a stealth status die. And as a reminder, bonus HP does not go under your adventurer chip. You would not place it here. Instead, you place this just on your mat or on your race sheet, and that bonus HP would absorb 1 damage before reducing your actual adventurer health, even though true damage or other effects that says lose HP, still ignore that. But now going back to refreshing shadows. So on the one face, we gain 1 bonus HP for each stealth, and then on the other face, you remove up to 2 light fatigue from your cooldown track for each unit affected by a stealth. So if you would roll this refreshing shadows, because we do have a stealth in our cooldown track, we can simply remove this light fatigue, in fact up to 2 for each of those stealth dice on any unit, and then you would exhaust this refreshing shadow as well. So a pretty handy utility tool, and as you might notice, quite unusually, this die has no misses, no tenacity sides. It means it's a guarantee 50% chance either getting one or another result, so it's a nice reliable die, and that is somewhat true for quite a lot of shadow dice that don't have a lot of misses, so quite reliable skill line overall. Now moving on to the level 2, we have Path of Darkness. Place this die in an occupied hex any number of hexes away in a straight line. At the start of any unit's turn, you may remove a stealth status die from your cooldown track to place yourself in this die's hex and exhaust this die. If a unit is occupying this die's hex, place that unit in the closest unoccupied hex and deal it X true damage. So as you can see, we have a status code S, which means it is a status die. This is why it can be placed on a hex rather than any other normal places. And you can place this die in any hex, any number of hexes away from you, but only in a straight line. So all of those 3 enemies are actually not in a straight line from our adventurer, because we do have straight lines only to those hexagonal directions, so either down or to those sides, or like that, or up there. So for example, you can place this die in a straight line, let's say somewhere over here, and then at the start of any unit's turn, you may remove a stealth status die to sort of teleport back to this space, which actually may be quite handy. And to give an example, let's say this Orc Bandit started its turn, which normally it means it would move 1 space, either to one of those 2 hexes and engage our adventure with 2 combat dice, but you can avoid that by at this very moment removing your stealth and then placing yourself to this hex, kind of instantly teleporting and then exhausting this die to your cooldown track. Now, because the timing of this ability is at the start of unit's turn, it means this enemy does not skip engage, it will simply move now to a different route. It will now go somewhere like 1 or 2 trying to reach you, so it does not skip engage. You simply place yourself your repositioning at the start of any unit's turn. Of course, because it's once again the word unit, this includes other adventurers, this includes even yourself, so once again you have quite a decent amount of flexibility on when exactly to trigger this effect, as long as you have a stealth status die in your cooldown track. This is sort of a resource that is needed to activate this Path of Darkness. Moving on to the next die of level 2, we have Shadow Barrier. After an adventurer takes damage, they may take 1 additional damage to gain a stealth status die. then exhaust this die. So just like Shadow Cloak, this Shadow Barrier is also an active die, as you can tell by this symbol A, which means after rolling and resolving it, you would place it like that in your active slot. And then after an adventurer takes damage, they may take 1 additional damage to gain a stealth status die. So first of all, after an adventurer, that means not only when you do take damage, it means you can use this effect even when any other adventurer take damage as well, which is a pretty unique effect. There aren't that many things that affect other adventurers in that kind of supportive way, so this is definitely something to keep in mind. And then the actual effect is that whenever they take damage, they may take 1 additional damage to gain a stealth status die. And why would you do that, you may ask? Well, I'm glad you asked, because there are actually some cases where taking simply 1 additional damage might totally be worth it to gain stealth status die. So let's say we don't have this stealth in our cooldown track yet, and we are completely surrounded by those 3 enemies, and we have level 5 activated first. As always, they go in that order. So this enemy would roll 1 combat die and let's say dealt 1 damage. We're taking that 1 damage, and then because we do have our Shadow Barrier in the active slot, we may take 1 additional damage and then gain a stealth status die and exhaust this Shadow Barrier itself. And now having Shadow, or rather stealth, in our cooldown track, both of these enemies, they will not engage us anymore because they did not start their turn adjacent to our adventurers. So they would simply move 1 and 2 and they will not engage. And as you can imagine, in this particular case, with 2 enemies, each with 2 combat, that is very likely we would lose way more than 1 additional health. So this is why this trade-off is sometimes worth it. Sometimes it is okay actually to take 1 additional damage to gain a stealth status die to then prevent more damage. That is kind of the main idea of Shadow Barrier. Now moving on to level 3, we have Aspect of Terror. If you currently have a stealth status die in your cooldown track, you may remove it to apply a fear status die to an adjacent enemy. And on the other phase, same thing, if you have a stealth status die in your cooldown track, you may remove it to apply fear status die to an enemy on your tile. So basically for this second result, it is an unlimited range, but within a single tile. Now do note that there is no mention of a target for this ability. That means you can declare 1 enemy as the target of your engage, while also rolling this Aspect of Terror and potentially applying it to a completely different unit, either adjacent enemy or just another enemy on your tile. Now do keep in mind though that because applying fear to adjacent enemy, this phase has 3 sides, which means it is a 50% chance of applying fear to adjacent enemy and only 2 phases of applying fear to any enemy on your tile. That means, generally speaking, you would probably want to use this whenever you have an adjacent enemy, and that is simply so you would not waste a roll if you get, let's say, this adjacent result. And maybe just explain what I mean. Let's say you would stand in over here, and then you rolled this Aspect of Terror and you got this result. And because you don't have any enemy adjacent to you, that would be a waste. So this is just a little bit more like a pro tip, strategy tip rather than rules. But it's usually best to roll this die whenever you have at least 1 enemy adjacent, simply so we could apply at least that result. And of course, you do need to have a stealth status die in your cooldown track in order to use it, and then you simply kind of trade in, you're removing your stealth from your cooldown track and then applying a fear status die to an enemy either adjacent or an enemy on your tile. And just as a quick reminder, what fear does, it allows you to ignore all enemy skills, which are these keywords that are printed below their name. So have aggressive for Orc Bandit, or divert for Dark Elf Bandit, or divert and dodge for High Elf Marauder. With those fear status die, you would completely ignore all of that. This is just something to keep in mind. And at last but not least, on the level 4 we have Dark Veil. At the start of your turn, you may reduce this die by 1 to gain a stealth status die. If this die would be reduced to 0, exhausted. And on the other phase, gain a stealth status die and immediately recover a different shadow skill die. So this is once again another die with no tenacity sides. As you can see, no misses, very reliable. And if you get any result with the numbers, you would place this in your active slot like that, and this die would work as a counter counting down to 0, and every time you do that, you reduce this die by 1, you can gain a stealth status die. Now, probably the most important thing, the most tricky caveat about this die is that you can trigger it only at the start of your turn. And start of turn is a very specific time window. It happens even before your recovery step, before you do any actions, any engages, which means potentially if you have no dice in your cooldown track, that would be a complete waste, because let's say you reduce this die by 1, you would gain a stealth status die, but then after start of your turn becomes your recovery step and you would recover this die immediately. So probably not something you would usually want to do. Ideally, you would like to have some dice already in your cooldown track, so then you would still get some value from this stealth. However, remember that whenever you deal damage, you immediately lose your remove this stealth status die. So a valid question you might have is that what's the point of even gaining this stealth status die at the start of your turn? Because ideally, I can imagine most players would rather prefer to have this die at the end of their turn rather than at the start. And well, for I guess a couple of reasons. First of all, you can totally do a turn without dealing any damage. For example, if you are in Delves, you want to simply explore, collect all sky shards and then retreat, or simply just grab it all and finish the encounter without dealing any damage potentially, this is definitely the way to go. You can completely cheese some Delves with this skill line as a whole, but with Dark Veil especially, I think this is just a really strong for that case. But also don't forget that we have 2 dice that do require having stealth in our cooldown track to sort of fuel to use them as a resource. Namely, we have Aspect of Terror and Path of Darkness. They do require for you to have stealth status die in your cooldown track. Mostly Aspect of Terror, I can imagine. This is probably the best use case. So you can think of your Dark Veil as a sort of resource generator that you can then spend on activating your Aspect of Terror. This is at least one way of thinking about it. And of course, on the other face of Dark Veil, where we don't have any numbers, it's this one. We simply immediately gaining 1 stealth status die, and then we can recover a different shadow skill die. For example, we can recover Aspect of Terror, and then of course this one gets exhausted to the cooldown track like that. So I think that's it when it comes to rules or special things you need to know about resolving all of those dice. And now let me quickly share some of my thoughts, what I think about the skill line as a whole. And well, overall I quite like it. I think starting with level 1 we have Shadow Cloak. It's just a very useful, somewhat reliable source of stealth. Now, whether stealth is a good thing in general, that is a completely different question. Some people think that it can just entirely cheese so many encounters to the point where it's just a little bit too overpowered. Being completely honest, sometimes I think this too. But overall, I think it's alright. It's basically just another way of preventing damage, kinda like acrobatics, kinda like heavy armor, but in a more kinda stealthy, shenanigans, assassin-y way. The second die of level 1, Refreshing Shadows, is actually quite decent as well, especially if you have a Wood Elf in your party, because of the Wood Elf racial ability that up to 2 party members may gain a stealth status die, and then you use your Refreshing Shadows and either gaining 2 bonus HP or removing up to 4 light fatigue, which is not too bad. I quite like that particular effect. Now, on to level 2, I must admit, I'm not a huge fan both of Path of Darkness and Shadow Barrier. I think they are a bit too finicky, and don't get me wrong, it's not like they're bad or anything, but I think they are just a bit too situational. There are just the use case are just so narrow, so sometimes it's hard to justify having either of them trained, to be honest. However, I do really like Aspect of Terror on level 3. Having a fear status die that you can apply to any unit pretty much on demand is huge. There are so many nasty enemy skills like Divert or Dodge or Shatter or Chillblain. Just lots of them. But without all of those keywords, those enemies just not as harmless, so this is just a fantastic way of dealing with some of those really tough enemies. You maybe not need this one if you have, for example, something like Executioner from the two-handed skill line, which kinda does the same thing. Instead defeating enemy, ignoring all their skills. But if you're playing with bow, or one-handed shield, or other skill lines that don't have access to this kind of effect, I think Fear is just absolutely fantastic, and it is by far one of the most utility skills you probably can have in the game. And on to level 4 Dark Veil, yeah, as I said, you can just completely cheese delves or some encounters to the point where it does feel a bit too cheesy and overpowered, but other than that, yeah, personally, I treat this Dark Veil purely as a source of stealth, just to trigger Aspect of Terror, sort of like a resource generator that you can spend on Aspect of Terror. At least that's been my experience with Dark Veil so far, because Aspect of Terror is definitely the king of this skill line in my opinion. And maybe just to clarify, don't forget that quest enemies, they are immune to status effects. So even though it does not specify in the skill itself, it simply says you may apply fear status die to adjacent enemy or to an enemy on your tile, but the core rules that quest enemies cannot gain status die still apply. So unfortunately you cannot cheese Dyslandra or other quest units for that matter, but nevertheless, yeah, Aspect of Terror is definitely amazingly strong in pretty much any other case. So there we have it, that is my quick take on Shadow. Overall, very useful utility skill line, even though it is a slightly more situational compared to something like super universally helpful like acrobatics, for example. And that's a wrap for today's video. If you find it helpful, please don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel and consider supporting me on Patreon. I would really appreciate this as well. Now, if you are new to the game, I would highly recommend checking out my Elder Scrolls Beginner Guide series, where I share a lot of general and practical gameplay tips. And if you would like to see how this skill line fits in certain builds, then I would suggest watching my Class Guide series, where I go in depth into each individual class, highlight their strength and show a little bit of gameplay to put all of this into practice. And well, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.